Well, good evening, and welcome to week 5 of EDLS 550. This is Dr. Stockdale. Tonight I'd like to talk to you specifically about some assessments and some ways of looking at objectives, language objectives in particular, for English learners. So we're going to talk about WIDA standards, MPIs or model performance indicators, and can-do descriptors. So what does WIDA stand for? Well, WIDA stands for World-Class Instructional Design and Assessment, which is a new acronym because it used to stand for the states which were a part of the consortium dedicated to the design, implementation of high standards, and the equitable educational opportunities for English language learners. WIDA still uses the acronym ELL, even though we've talked about the switch nationally to go to just ELs. So now the consortium has grown into a large number of states within the United States who test English learners using WIDA materials. And here's a map that shows you the consortium members. The ones in blue have adopted the WIDA English Language Development Standards. And of course you see that most of the southeastern states are WIDA states, which means that if you have a child transfer in from another WIDA state and they have been tested using WIDA Access or any of the screeners, then those scores automatically transfer into the PowerSchool system and we use those scores. If, for instance, however, a child comes from, let's say, Texas, that child would need to be screened using WIDA to get a baseline, and then in the spring the child would take the WIDA Access to determine what his or her language proficiency is. So the WIDA standards are represented here on this slide. There are only 5 of them. And at first, if you're a classroom teacher, you might think, what? Only 5 standards? But if you look, Standard 1 is that English language learners communicate for social and instructional purposes within the school setting. That's really saying that we're going to teach English learners to not only communicate for their basic needs and socially with their peers, but we're also going to specifically teach instructional or academic language that they will need within the school setting. Standard 2 deals with communicating information, ideas, and concepts necessary for success, academic success, in the content of language arts. So within Standard 2 are all of the ELA standards that deal with listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Anything that an English learner might use to communicate in the language arts. Standard 3 is the same type of standard, but it deals with academic success in the content area of math. Standard 4 is science, and Standard 5 is social studies. So basically, these 5 WIDA standards cover all of the South Carolina standards that you are required to teach, with the exception of anything that doesn't have to do with language, with listening, speaking, reading, or writing. Now, having said that, this is important because sometimes as an as an ESOL teacher, I would go into a classroom with a plan in mind of what to do with an English learner, and the teacher might say, he's really struggling with his multiplication facts. Would you help him review his multiplication facts? Well, technically, that may or may not be a language objective because it is more of rote memory. But if I'm helping him with academic language to deal with maybe the different words that deal with multiplication, or maybe I'm using the terminology that he would need. I can kind of embed that in here, but we try to stay away from anything that is just rote memory, anything that's memorization. And that pretty much goes with a lot of your standards that have nothing to do with English learners. A lot of our standards, we want to be on that Webb's depth of knowledge. We want to take them a little deeper than just the surface level. So the same thing holds true for English learners. The WIDA Access is organized in grade clusters from pre-K to grade 12, and it tests listening, speaking, reading, and writing. There are 4 separate scores that a child will receive after they've taken the WIDA Access test. And then they're given in each one of these areas, they're given a proficiency level of 1 pre-functional, 2 beginning, 3 intermediate, 4 advanced, 5 initially proficient, and level 6 is first year exited. But that's a little misleading because the rules have changed a little bit. To exit the ESOL program, a student must score a total or composite score, a combined score of 4.4 on the WIDA Access and a 4.0 in each of the 4 language domains. Unfortunately, I have taught students who might be a 5.3 in listening, a 4.0 in speaking, a 4.6 in reading, and then a 3.7 in writing. Because that writing might be 3.7, they are not exited and they are still in the ESOL program. So, taking a look a little bit closer at each of the standards. Here we have Standard 1, the social and instructional language. And here are some sample topics underneath each one that might fall under there. And these are just representative of the state academic content standards and how they might fall underneath each one of the language proficiency standards. This is grades 3 through 5. Just a sample that I pulled from the WIDA document. Now the can-do descriptors, which are available at wida.com, www.wida.com, help once you've got that WIDA score because they indicate what English learners can process and what they can produce in the English language. Not where we want them to be, but where they already are and can do. And we can use these descriptors to differentiate instruction, to plan our lessons, to assess English learners' progress, and to understand what English learners can be expected to do. And I think I forgot an apostrophe there. Excuse me. So this is actually a picture of the WIDA website as I was leaving the classroom or leaving my job as an ESOL teacher. The website address has not changed. The look of it has changed somewhat. So if you'll go to www.wida.us, I think I told you wrong in a previous slide, and I apologize. There are some resources you can access and some that only your ESOL teacher can access. But to get a membership or a username for this, you would have to ask your district ESOL director to assign you one, and so that you could log in to get all of the information. But you would find the Standards and Instruction tab, and then under that you will find the can-do descriptors. Now this is open to the public, and you shouldn't need to log on to get the can-do descriptors. I wanted you to be able to look at them and know what they are, because you as a classroom teacher with an English learner should know where they are, and you should be using them. So once you've clicked on that, if you go to the grade level in which you're teaching, here we're at grades 2 and 3, there is a PDF, and it's going to look something like this. You're going to be given clusters of objectives that's broken down into listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So if you have a student who is a level 3 in listening, that child should be able to follow modeled multi-step oral directions. But he or she may not be able to identify illustrated activities from oral descriptions. This would be too hard. He or she should be able to do everything under here. They should be about right here in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. It is not unusual at all to see an English learner have a significantly lower score in one area than another, just like our students who speak only English. So if we look a little more closely, you can see that if we're looking at a child who is listening at, let's say they've already reached a level 6. They're as high as they can go. When they're listening to you talk about determining the main ideas, supporting details of text, read aloud to them, or information in the media and different formats. Listening, they're able to comprehend. But for perhaps speaking, they are only a level 4. Well, rather than asking them to provide descriptive details, which would be a level 6, you might ask them to describe situations and events from school and the community. They're going to be, or sequence events, they're going to be at a different level when they produce their answers than when they are receiving information, which, again, if you think back to babies, they're able to understand and listen, but more information than they are able to produce. Here we've got reading, and so if a reader, on the other hand, might be a level 4, and they're reading, ordering a series of events based on familiar text, this child might only be writing at a level 1 and creating visual representations of ideas and stories. The reading might surprise you because they're able to sound out words. They've had lots of stories read to them, but the writing is significantly lower. And so what you are expected to do, whether you have been told this or not, as a classroom teacher, is you are supposed to be writing language objectives for your English learners in your in your lesson plan book. And should the State Department come into your school, and they do every 3 years, they come into the district every 3 years, should they choose your school, choose your classroom, an auditor could very well ask you to show you your lesson plans for your English learners. And you are expected to have language objectives, just like in the video that we watched last week of the teacher who had a content objective on the board, and she also had a language objective on the board. So here, if you Google model performance indicators, there are so many out there. You could borrow them, but it really makes more sense to find a model performance indicator that deals with something close to what you are looking for, and then tweak it. And I'm going to share with you how to go about writing a model performance indicator. A model performance indicator, or MPI, is simply another name for a language objective. And here the strand has 5 different model performance indicators, or MPIs, based on this child's reading level. Here is a whole group of MPIs. This strand is about chemical and physical attributes. This one's about weather. This one's about living organisms, and this one is about change. You are required to write language objectives for every subject that you teach if you have an English learner. So here is the strand, and this is just another graphic showing that we're going from least difficult entering to most difficult, reaching. Again, this one is, just to let you know, the proficiency levels that I spoke about earlier are not called the same in the MPI strands, but you would still look them up by level. So entering equals prefunctional. Emerging is the same as beginning. Developing and intermediate are the same. Expanding and advanced. Bridging, initially proficient. Reaching, and first year exited. Just to make sure that you realize that. So, model performance indicators describe how students can use the language. They're examples or models of accessible language skills. They reflect the second language acquisition process. They provide anchors for the curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And there are more than 1,000 of them already available. Just tweak them. Or, if you feel so inclined, create your own from scratch. So, looking at the MPI strands, we know that they represent a progression of increasing language complexity. They represent increasing complexity in vocabulary usage and language control. They are topically bound, meaning that the topics per strand are going to change. You're going to have a strand for each topic. And they illustrate that language development can be scaffolded within the language domain. Just because you've got a strong listener doesn't mean you've got a strong speaker of English. So again, we've got the strand, and here you have the model performance indicator. So within that strand, there are 5 model performance indicators. So I think it's easiest to have the visual, and I really liked when I went to a conference and someone used the flower visual. So you have 3 parts to an MPI. You have the language function, the content stem, and the instructional support. The language function is the verb. It's your Webb's depth of knowledge, what used to be Bloom's taxonomy. It is the verb that is observable. The content stem is the topic. It's the subject, or the topic of the standard in which you're using, and it's grade level appropriate. And then you're going to provide instructional support or supports. It's the strategy or the tool that you're going to use to help the English learner access the content. It might be sensory, it might be graphic, it might be interactive. You are writing a language objective for the English learner. So again, here are the verbs. So you need to think on which domains or domain will you focus. Are you focusing on listening, speaking, reading, or writing? You would want to most likely just choose one for each language objective. And then you think about the standard. That's the STEM. This is a 5th grade. These are 5th grade standards right out of our standards document from our State Department website. And they're based on the curriculum standards. And then here are some instructional supports. So Sensory supports over here could be anything from realia, such as real objects, the girl in the video using the vegetables to teach the health lesson or the food lesson, was using real food. Manipulatives, anything from counters and thermometers or any type of, normally thinking about math, but it could be science, it could be magnetic letters, pictures, photos, illustrations, drawings, any kind of graphic organizers such as diagrams, physical activities, getting them up and moving. That's why TPR, total physical response, is such a big deal in ESOL. Videos, audios, models, and figures using representations of real life objects. Those are the sensory supports. Here are some graphic supports. Graphic organizers, tables, charts, graphs, number lines, timelines. Interactive supports. This is your grouping usually. Are you asking your students to work in pairs with partners? That's a support. Small group, cooperative groups. Are you allowing them to use their native language? That's a support. Are you labeling objects and allowing them to use their native language, using the internet, programs, software programs, or letting them work with a mentor. Here are just some more supports. So I encourage you to stop the video, take a look at those, and ask yourself, what am I already using? I feel certain that you are already using a lot of sensory supports, graphic supports, as well as other supports to help your struggling readers and English learners. Things such as online manipulatives could be a support. And again, so when you go to write the model performance indicator, you're going to have the language function. You're going to have the verb. You're going to ask them to name familiar objects. What is the support you're giving them? Photographs or illustrations, and the topic is weather conditions. So this is from a pre-K or kindergarten science standard. Name familiar objects and photographs or illustrations associated with weather conditions. Here are some more, just to give you more examples. The language function would be describe, that's the verb. The stem, whether the linear equation or the graph represents a car going at a greater speed. And the support is using a word bank and sentence frames. There were so many supports listed in your ELL teacher handbook, toolkit. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, here's another example. Compare narrative points of view in extended texts using graphic organizers with a partner. So the verb is compare, the topic is narratives, and you're supporting them with a partner, and also this has two supports, graphic organizers. And that's it. Please check out www.weta.us and see what you can find out about the assessment that is required of English learners, and also more about can-do descriptors and model performance indicators. Have a good week. Take care. Bye-bye.